The billionaire's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. "I paid $10,000 for this seat. I'm not sitting beside people like her. Move her to the back where she belongs." Gasps, murmurs. The entire cabin froze. The woman said nothing, just lowered her head, hiding behind her dark sunglasses. But when she finally took them off, every passenger stopped breathing. Even the captain stepped out of the cockpit, speechless. Before we continue, from which country are you watching this story? I'd love to know in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional, real-life stories like this, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. The story begins on a bright morning at JFK International Airport. Passengers filled the first-class lounge, sipping lattes and scrolling through their phones, unaware that one flight today would soon make headlines across the world. Edward Langford, a name whispered in luxury circles, strode through the terminal with the confidence of a man who owned half the city. Tailored suit, polished shoes, gold cufflinks that glimmered like trophies. Billionaire, investor, ruthless in business, and worse, in attitude. He wasn't flying private today. His jet was under maintenance, so he'd reluctantly booked a commercial first-class seat to London. For Edward, it wasn't travel. It was an inconvenience. As he reached the gate, he checked his Rolex, then scolded his assistant over the phone. "Next time, charter something, Evan. I don't care if it costs $1 million. I don't share air with strangers." When boarding was announced, he walked past the line, ignoring the looks from passengers. The attendants greeted him with forced smiles. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Langford." "Just show me my seat," he muttered. "Seat 2A, window, first class." He tossed his designer jacket onto the seat, loosened his tie, and sighed. But as he turned, his expression darkened. Someone was already sitting beside him in 2B, a woman, black, early 40s. Elegant, quiet, wearing a soft beige coat and dark sunglasses that covered half her face. She sat upright, hands folded gently over a leather handbag, projecting an aura of calm. Edward frowned. "Excuse me, are you sure you're in the right seat?" She turned her head slightly, her tone polite. "Yes, 2B, that's what my ticket says." Her voice was low, smooth, unbothered. That irritated him. He called the flight attendant. "I paid $10,000 for this seat. I'm not sitting beside people like her. Move her to the back where she belongs." The words struck the air like thunder. Passengers turned their heads. The attendant froze, eyes wide. Sir, I'm afraid that's not possible. She's a first-class passenger, too." Edward scoffed. "You can't be serious. Look at her. Do you really think she belongs here?" Gasps rippled through the cabin. A man in row 3 lowered his newspaper. A woman clutched her child's hand. The flight attendant stammered an apology, then turned toward the woman. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" The woman smiled faintly beneath her sunglasses. "Everything's fine. Please don't trouble yourself." Her calmness made the scene even more unbearable for Edward. He expected anger, confrontation, anything. But her silence was louder than his insults. As more passengers boarded, whispers grew louder. Did he just say that? Unbelievable. How can someone talk like that in 2025? Edward ignored them all. He crossed his arms, looking out the window, jaw tight. He felt justified, powerful even, like his money made him untouchable. But deep down, something about her bothered him. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't offended. She wasn't anything. When the plane door closed and the engines roared to life, Edward felt a strange discomfort. Not because of the flight, but because every time he glanced sideways, she was just sitting there. Peaceful, composed, like a storm couldn't move her. As the plane lifted off the runway, a small boy across the aisle pointed at Edward and whispered to his mother, "Mom, why is that man so mad at her?" His mother shushed him, glancing nervously toward Edward. He pretended not to hear, but his ears burned. The woman adjusted her scarf, then turned slightly toward him. "You don't need to worry. I won't disturb you." Her tone wasn't defensive. It was gentle, almost kind, the very thing he didn't deserve. He wanted to say something cruel again, but the words stuck in his throat. For the first time in years, Edward Langford didn't have a comeback. The plane continued its climb. The cabin settled into quiet. Yet under that silence, something was changing. Neither of them knew it yet. But this 7-hour flight would change both of their lives forever. The engines hummed softly as the plane steadied above the clouds. A calm blue sky stretched endlessly outside the window, but inside the cabin, tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Edward Langford leaned back in his seat, pretending to relax, but his jaw was still clenched. Every sound, the clink of a spoon, the soft rustle of the woman's pages as she opened her small notebook, irritated him. She hadn't said another word since takeoff. No complaints, no reactions, just quiet grace. And somehow, that silence made him angrier. He called. The flight attendant again. "Miss, is there any way I can change seats?" The attendant hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir. The flight is completely full." Edward exhaled sharply. "Then at least make sure she doesn't—" He stopped mid-sentence. The woman had turned, her head slightly, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile, as if she could read his thoughts. He looked away quickly. For a man who dominated boardrooms and terrified CEOs, this felt new, losing control. The attendant began serving dinner. Trays clinked, glasses shimmered. Edward's meal arrived first: steak, wine, and salad. The woman received hers soon after, just soup and bread. She whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was so calm it almost felt musical. Edward noticed her hands, steady, elegant, with a faint scar near her wrist. She lifted the spoon carefully, as though even that small act carried grace. He scoffed quietly. "You know, they have better food in economy. You might feel more comfortable there." The attendant's face went pale. A man across the aisle frowned. The woman, however, didn't even flinch. She set down her spoon, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and replied softly, "Comfort isn't about where you sit. It's about who you are." Her words hit him like turbulence, smooth yet piercing. He opened his mouth to reply, but couldn't find the words. Instead, he turned toward the window, pretending to admire the sunset. Outside, the horizon burned, orange and gold. Inside, his arrogance began to crack, just a little. Moments later, a sudden jolt shook the cabin. The lights flickered. A baby cried. Turbulence. Edward's wine glass tipped, spilling red liquid across his sleeve. He cursed under his breath, fumbling for tissues. Before the attendant could reach him, a hand extended a silk scarf toward him. Her scarf. "Here," she said softly. "Use this." He froze. For a moment, he stared at her, at the small act of kindness from the very person he'd humiliated minutes ago. His pride told him to refuse, but something deeper, something human, made him take it. "Thanks," he muttered quietly. For the first time, his voice had lost its edge. The turbulence passed. The lights steadied. But the silence that followed wasn't cold anymore. It was different. Edward stared at the scarf in his hands. Soft, expensive, and scented faintly with jasmine. He didn't know it yet, but that small gesture, that moment of grace, was the beginning of his undoing. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Dinner trays were cleared, cabin lights dimmed, and most passengers slipped into a quiet lull. But Edward Langford couldn't rest. He sat rigid in his seat, staring at the scarf still folded neatly on. His tray table, the same scarf she had offered him moments ago. The same scarf that carried her perfume, soft and elegant. It unsettled him. How could someone he'd insulted show such grace? The woman beside him, still wearing her sunglasses, scribbled something in a small leather notebook. Every now and then she paused, thinking, then wrote again. Her movements were calm, deliberate. Edward found himself glancing at her reflection in the window. He noticed the faintest trace of tiredness on her face, a kind of fatigue that didn't come from travel, but from life itself. He wanted to ask what she was, writing, but his pride kept him silent. Then his phone buzzed, a message from his assistant. Urgent! Langford Holdings stock is crashing. CEO of Atlas Corp exposed your deal. We're down 12%. Edward's stomach dropped. He opened the attached news article, headlines screaming, Langford under fire for exploiting charity funds in Africa. He clenched his fists. The irony burned. The deal he'd made last year, one that promised development but stole land from poor families, had finally caught up to him. He loosened his tie, sweating. For the first time, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt small. The woman glanced at him. Are you all right? She asked softly. He looked at her, startled. It's nothing. Just business. You look troubled, she replied. It's complicated, he muttered. There was a pause. Then she smiled faintly. Everything complicated becomes simple when you stop thinking only about yourself. He froze. Her words hit harder than she knew. For a moment he felt exposed, like she could see straight through his expensive suit and arrogance into the hollow man beneath. Trying to change the subject, he gestured toward her notebook. You write a lot. What's it about? She hesitated, then said, About people, the ones the world forgets. I try to give them a voice. Edward raised an eyebrow. You write stories? Not stories, she said softly. Real lives. He nodded slowly. Then, as she shifted her coat, he noticed a small silver pin on her lapel, a circular emblem with the letters UN engraved in blue. He frowned. You work for the United Nations? Something like that, she replied. Her tone was quiet, humble, yet there was weight behind it, the kind carried by people who had seen the world's worst and still chosen to help. He stared at her for a long moment, confused, curious, even ashamed. The woman returned to her writing, calm as ever. Edward leaned back, mind racing. The news of his scandal flashed again in his thoughts. His empire was crumbling, and here beside him sat a woman whose dignity made his wealth look worthless. The irony was poetic, painful. And though he didn't know it yet, the truth about her, and what she'd done for the very people his company had wronged, was about to shake his world even more. As the plane crossed the Atlantic, the cabin slept. But Edward Langford's eyes remained open, haunted by guilt, curiosity, and a name he didn't yet know. Morning light broke through the cabin windows as the plane soared over the Atlantic. Most passengers were still asleep, their faces bathed in soft gold. But in seat 2A, Edward Langford hadn't slept a second. His mind was a battlefield. Stock crashes, ruined reputation, and that haunting phrase the woman had said hours ago. Everything complicated becomes simple when you stop. Thinking only about yourself, he didn't understand how a stranger's words could hit harder than the fall of his empire. A soft announcement interrupted his thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, said the captain through the intercom, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a very special guest on board today. Edward barely looked up until he heard the next words. We're honored to have Dr. Maya Thompson, recipient of the Global Peace Award and United Nations Humanitarian Ambassador, traveling with us today. On behalf of the crew, Dr. Thompson, thank you for your service to the world. Every head turned. The name echoed through the cabin. Dr. Maya Thompson. Edward's breath caught. He turned slowly to the woman beside him, still calm, still graceful. She smiled politely at the applauding passengers. Then, with quiet dignity, she removed her sunglasses. The cabin went silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Her face was familiar, the face he'd seen on magazine covers, news reports, global conferences. The woman who led rescue teams into war zones, who built schools in Africa, who stood before presidents and pleaded for peace. That woman. Edward's heart sank like a stone. The person he had insulted, humiliated, and belittled was a global humanitarian icon. Whispers rippled through first class. "Oh my God, that's her! Dr. Maya Thompson, she's a legend." Didn't that man yell at her earlier? Phones quietly came out. Cameras clicked. Edward could feel the eyes on him, burning with silent judgment. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. I didn't know," he whispered. Maya turned her gaze to him, calm, compassionate, yet piercing. "It's all right," she said softly. "You weren't supposed to know. That's the point, isn't it? We shouldn't have to be someone for others to treat us with respect." Her words hung in the air like truth itself. Edward's eyes stung. For once, he couldn't hide behind his pride or power. The captain himself stepped out from the cockpit, offering a handshake. "Dr. Thompson, it's an honor to have you aboard." She smiled humbly. "The honor's mine, Captain." As the passengers applauded again, Edward lowered his head. Shame and realization collided inside him. For years, he thought money made him important. Now, sitting beside a woman whose kindness outweighed his fortune, he realized how poor he truly was. And, in that quiet cabin at 30,000 feet, Edward Langford felt something he hadn't felt in decades, the weight of his own humanity. The flight attendants prepared the cabin for landing. Trays locked, seats upright. London's skyline shimmered beneath the clouds like a city of glass and gold. But Edward Langford barely noticed. He sat quietly, eyes lowered, hands clasped. A man unrecognizable from the one who had boarded hours ago. Across from him, Dr. Maya Thompson closed her notebook. Her expression was calm, peaceful, as if she carried no anger, no grudge, only grace. The silence between them was heavy yet healing. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice rough, stripped of arrogance. "Dr. Thompson, I owe you an apology." She turned gently toward him. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Langford." "No," he insisted, shaking his head. "You don't understand. I've spent my whole life thinking money made me better. But sitting next to you made me realize I'm not even half the person I thought I was." Maya smiled faintly. "It's never too late to change what you see when you look at others, or yourself." Her words settled deep in his heart. The plane touched down with a soft thud, tires kissing the runway. Passengers clapped softly, a habit on long flights. But for Edward, it sounded like forgiveness. When the doors opened, reporters and cameras were already waiting outside. News had spread fast. Someone had leaked the video of his earlier outburst. Flashlights exploded in his face as he stepped off the plane beside Maya. "Mr. Langford, is it true you insulted Dr. Thompson? Do you have anything to say?" He hesitated, then turned toward the microphones. His voice trembled, but this time, it was honest. "Yes, I did. And I'm ashamed. I met greatness today, and I almost missed it because of my own blindness." Gasps, murmurs, then silence. He turned to Maya, bowed his head, and walked away from the cameras. That evening, the video went viral under the title, "Billionaires. Public apology mid-flight." Millions watched. Comments poured in, some furious, some forgiving. But the one comment that pinned to the top came from Dr. Maya Thompson herself. We all sit on the same flight called life. Some of us just need to open our eyes before it lands. Days later, Edward anonymously donated $10 million to Maya's foundation, not for publicity, but because something inside him had shifted forever, and somewhere across the world, in a small refugee camp Maya once built, a group of children played under a bright blue sky, unaware that one act of kindness at 30,000 feet had just changed their future. Respect is not earned by money, titles, or power. It's earned by kindness, the kind that speaks even when others stay silent. Now tell me, if you were on that flight, would you have stood up for her? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please give it a like. Share it with your friends, and subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories every week. Your support truly helps us bring more real-life lessons to light.